Hello and welcome to the third workshop as part of a six-part series on in and around surrounding research and methodology. This is a Re-Phew consulting a Re-Phew consulting workshop surrounding literature reviews, and I'm going to be highlighting or providing an overview of what literature reviews are and what they are not, and hopefully given an overview of how literature reviews can support and substantiate research at either sort of undergraduate level or even postgraduate level, and also highlight a few other main objectives, which will be the main the sort of main objectives of this workshop will be to understand the basis of literature reviews, understand the process of constructing a good literature review, and acknowledge the key features for a literature review. So hopefully by the end of this workshop, these three main objectives can be approached. So to begin with, I'm going to outline some definitions. So what is a literature in context of what is a literature review, and so here are some definitions. So a literature review is a summary of relevant research and can be written or part of an oral presentation. In some context, there's various resources that those listening to this workshop can actually check out, and some of those resources have been added at the end of this presentation and at the end of this workshop. The main point is a literature review is a summary of a sort of relevant research according to a particular research question, for example, and it can be can be written or be included in part of an oral presentation to some extent. And a literature review is also an interpretation and a synthesis of published research. Again, in the resources that are highlighted at the end of this workshop, I will highlight where viewers can check out, get more understanding. A literature review is a written summary of the finding of a literature search which demonstrates that literature has been located, read and evaluated. And in this context is probably perhaps one of the most important entities about conducting a literature review, because when after an applicable research topic has been identified or constructed, then after that a summary of the finding of a literature of the literature around that research topic can help substantiate and demonstrate the understanding of what areas what areas around that research topic or that research question still need to be bridged and identified. For example, a literature review is also or can also be defined as a systematic explicit and reproducible method for identifying and evaluating and synthesizing the existing body of completed and recorded work produced by researchers, scholars, and practitioners. And there's again in the resources that I will highlight towards the end of this workshop. I will highlight some context in relating to those resources as well. So the main point on this, on the fourth point here, around the definitions, is that all literature reviews have to be constructed once they are constructed, and for example, if they're peer reviewed and they're published. The main thing is about a literature review versus, for example, a typical article or for example, an essay or a piece of writing. For example, a literature review is has credence in context in relating to reproducibility. So what happens is that those who are looking to contribute and add more knowledge to a particular topic, or where a gap, for example, might have been identified in retrospectively, literature review, one of the main objectives is to be able to reproduce that work if another investigator or researcher looks to for example, follow up follow up research as part of a new and developing work. So reproducibility in and around literature reviews is important. And finally, here one of the main definitions is that a literature review is a critical summary and assessment of the range of existing materials dealing with knowledge and understanding in a given field. So irrespective of whether someone is from the sciences, from in aspects of laboratory science, laboratory research, or laboratory practices, for example, in the sciences, or as working as a, for example, a frontline healthcare professional, or a practitioner in an area of healthcare, or for example, an engineer, or so on and so forth. Generally, a literature review is a sort of a summary and assessment of the range of existing existing knowledge dealing with sort of an understanding in a given field. And again, the critical summary in context with the above point about reproducibility, the summary based on for example, a different research topic or a question can after doing a literature review can be different, but ultimately, if a literature review was to duplicate some of the works from a previous research project, for example, from a different author, then and the current author who's looking to investigate on a similar topic or the same topic should identify similar results as part of their literature review, as part of doing as part of conducting a new literature review. So this context should be understood as part of some of the baseline definitions of a literature review. So I'm now going to highlight a few sort of distinctions around literature reviews, and there's just three main points here really. A literature search is the process of locating relevant literature. Now, to expand on this, is to inform that um, a literature search is based on, for example, in many forms of research that have been published, no matter the area of specialty of the field. All of those all research projects will have main terminologies, or what are referred to as keywords. Now, those keywords should or can, when put in appropriate search engines, and I will touch on some of the sort of search engines that can be used when using search engines to identify literature according to a given topic, or around a research question. Then the key the main term the keywords can be used, and it may be that a more novel research can be identified along with existing research that pertain to that particular area of that area of research, for example. So the process of locating relevant literature starts really by putting in a few key terms or key terminologies into appropriate databases or search engines that hopefully should prompt or result with appropriate literature pertaining to that particular topic. Now, another distinction is that something referred to as a literature survey, and this is this is a non-evaluative overview. So in some context, a literature survey is in a way for example, when putting key terminologies into a search engine or a couple of search engines, what then results is that there'll be several. For example, there could be something as minimal as something minimum as for example, I don't know, for example, 50 papers that are based on that topic, and then in one search engine. Then in another search engine, there may well be over 300, 400, or maybe 700 or 800 plus sort of publications around those key terminologies. Now, what will happen is when identifying, obviously, for a novice, in some context, the number of for example, peer-reviewed publications that are identified in between different search engines can be overwhelming. So so one thing to understand here in relating to some of the distinctions and a literature survey. A literature survey is basically a definition used to understand, after putting key terminologies in, understanding what sort of publications or works come out of that initial search. And so what will tend to happen, there'll be a mixture between peer-reviewed publications, and there'll also be some works that, for example, peer-reviewed publications in relating to paper publications, but also, for example, book publications, or even as highlighted, non particular, as in some regard, some of the works can be particularly non-evaluative. So generally, a literature survey helps just sort of get an overview of the kind of literature works that are out from the initial initial search through a search engine, through a search engine. And the guidance or the understanding I would give as part of this workshop is to actually use more than one search engine or database, because one search engine may favor, for example, medical or clinical publications or peer-reviewed publications versus another search engine which may have more a kind of a mixture of clinical or medical, as well as more scientific, as well in addition to some of the sort of social kind of publications around a particular topic as well. And the final distinction here, I'll highlight definition. I'm sorry. The final distinction around here, this bullet point, I want to highlight is that a literature review is a critical consideration of the relevant literature. So a good literature review will have a critical sort of a critical appraisal or a critical sort of consideration of the literature that has been documented in a publication or in works that have been published. So what this means is that literature, a critical consideration is basically where authors or co-authors or people who have published, for example, have critically evaluated the literature against a particular research question or research topic. So that's some points around the distinctions around a literature review. Now, I'm going to highlight a few points about what a literature review is and what it is not, which is pretty much the crux of this workshop in some regard. So a literature review is an overview of literature related to the field of study. So again, that could be in an area of sciences, in an area of clinical practice, could be in an area of science. It can be in psychology research. It can be in neurosciences. It is generally speaking, a literature review is an overview of a field that an investigator is intrigued by. And then a literature review is also an explanation of why this literature is related to the field of study. So in the previous slide, I've mentioned, for example, how a good literature review is where authors or co-authors have identified a gap in research and look to bridge that area in some way, but also whilst in as part of the process and in conducting a literature review, what authors and co-authors do as part of the work is also critically appraise the literature from for example, certain duration or time points. So for example, some would say, for example, not to once identifying literature based on key terminologies, not to use use papers that have been published, or works that have been published that are more than 10 years old or a decade old, for example, because generally what will happen is that in some areas in some areas and some specialties, there has been an overwhelming contribution to areas to that particular specialty, and so therefore the literature, when putting it in context in an actual literature review, when it's being composed or conducted, then basically it's ensuring that the literature that is being used or implemented is critically appraised based on not just relevance but also duration, because that when there is an when there are uh, for example, colleagues or peers or an audience, or for example, looking at that work, then they will want to know, for example, the most up-to-date knowledge around that particular area of study and investigation. So there's that point to be made here, and a literature review is also evaluative. So again, apart from being a process where a piece of work and a process where writing and research is critically appraised against a particular research topic or a research question, a literature review can help, and is supposed to help inform, by way of being an evaluative piece of writing as well. So those are some of the points around what a literature review is. And now and I'm going to just highlight a few points around what a literature review is not. So a literature review is not a list of writings relating to the field of study. And note how I mentioned is a list. It's not a list. So just because, for example, after doing a search, after implementing a getting understanding through a basic keyword terminology search across different search engines, for example, just because a search engine might come out with several thousand sort of papers or topics, papers or publications relating to a field of study or a topic, it doesn't mean to say that they will all be relevant. So that's number one. That's another number one point. But also to highlight that it's with that also should inform or help the investigator to understand that it's not a list of writings. So so in this context, if you compare, an example might be, for example, might be that a literature review is something that is evaluative and critically appraised, but some mistaken a literature review as almost like a sort of in a basic way, for example, almost like can mistaken for it as like a shopping list in one way or another, and that might sound quite crude, but in all literature reviews there are or good literature reviews, there are there's what's referred to as inclusion and exclusion criterias. Now, because the way because authors or co-authors, when conducting literature reviews, they apply specific filters, for example, again, inclusion and exclusion criteria, when it comes to actually in line to, apart from the appraisal process and the evaluation process of as part in a literature review, the inclusion and exclusion criteria, amongst other particular filters and specifics, can end up looking like a shopping list. So it's to be made clear here that a literature review is not writings related to a list of writings relating to the field of study. It has to be meticulous, it has to be evaluative, it has to be sort of critically appraised, and there are appraisal programs that can be implemented to identify to implement an appropriate appraisal according to the types of publications that are out there that align to a particular research topic or research question. So that point, so it's not a list of writings. Now, literature review is not also the activity of identifying relevant literature, and it's not a literature search, and in a way that might sound a little bit confusing, but what I'm getting at here is that basically when doing a literature review, in the initial stages, there is a baseline or a basic literature search to an extent, using key terminologies to understand what sort of works have been published according to a topic or a specialty research question, etc. But when composing the literature review and actually putting it in context for in relating to a publication, for example, it's not the authors and co-authors, when putting it in context, have to make sure that there is an evidence-based sort of methodology that's taken place and been implemented to ensure that work in the future can authors or co-authors or teams or people who want to do similar research can duplicate or replicate that research by implementing the same methodology that the current author or investigator has used. So by in this context, the activity of the activity side of things and of identifying the relevant literature, it is not it's not to be it should not be mistaken as a literature review. It should not be mistaken as a literature search. And so the final point here is on this slide is that a literature review is not a neutral account of literature. So it has to be an appraisal process. So it's not an account, and it's not a list of papers that are listed in a piece of work. It is actually an appraisal or an evaluation of the literature that pertains to a particular topic. So now I'm going to highlight a few points relating to sort of relating to the academic side of literature reviews, and how they further are distinguished. In this context, I'm going to highlight this from in three basic points. So documentary research can also be in some contexts it can be related to a literature review, but a documentary research um, which takes documentary research which takes forms of literature as primary evidence in its own right. So what this means is that a literature review from a sort of an academic perspective um, uh, uh, is similar, but also has some differences when it comes to documenting research, uh, because of the types of evidence that authors or co-authors or teams are looking to identify and have and shape perspective. So in this context, literature review is is one way that from a documentary perspective as well as a academic perspective, is a way of highlighting primary evidence around a particular topic. Um, and Another point here to be made is that that a literature review is also or can be distinguished from um, um, something that is referred to as, for example, library-based research, or desk research, or archive research. So basically, when people, for example, when investigators look to identify understanding around particular topics or subject areas, and most researchers have a way of implementing a sort of a basic search around the topic in a self-directed manner. Now, these self-directed sort of mannerisms are referred to as library-based research, desk research, or desktop research, or archive research. So these definitions, or these um, points are also where there's differences between sort of academic composing sorry conducting an academic literature review versus identifying literature around a topic at sort of baseline level. Um, and finally, I want to highlight that a literature review can also be distinguished from from works or documentary research that includes discourse and textual analysis. Now, what this means is that where there's sort of works that have been published in lots of different ways, for example, for example, maybe perhaps across media, but also in paper publications or book publications, etc. A literature review is not the same in this context. So it's not, for example, a textual analysis, and it's not a textual analysis, but in some context there can be discourse in part of a literature review, but it's down to the investigatory or research team how they are looking to place a more understanding around a particular subject, a research question, or a research question, or a topic. So I'm now going to highlight something a caveat really. So let's say, for example, if you were asked to write a literature review for any assessed work, you should get an understanding. You should look to get an understanding of precisely what is expected. For example, it is helpful or can be helpful to identify or determine the following points. So whether it is really a review that is required and not a search or a survey. So again, as a caveat, it's important to get understanding from, for example, lead investigators or whoever is encouraging to conduct a review or works for analysis, to get definitions of what they really are requesting. So that's important as a number one point. The next point is how long the review should be, or the literature review should be. Now, in peer review publications with regard to literature reviews, normally they run at, in relating to word counts. A typical literature review can be anything from 3,500 up to potentially 5,000 or 6,000 words. So generally speaking, when getting an understanding of who is requesting a literature review or an analysis of works, when getting an understanding of the word count or that they are requiring as well, that should give investigators an idea of the kind of work that they should be sort of looking to compose. And this brings me on to the next point around this caveat slide, and that is to say how comprehensive it should be. So literature reviews, as mentioned in the previous slide, they're normally works that require evaluation, and they're normally works that require an overview of the literature in relating to an appraisal. So when someone is aiming to do a comprehensive piece of work or a comprehensive piece of writing, a literature review gives the indication, or would give the indication, that an investigator has to have an appraisal a sort of mindset, and by way of also approaching work from an evaluative perspective. And the next point I'm going to make here is that whether the work needs to be a standalone piece of work, or whether it can be integrated into various sections of an essay or a dissertation or a research thesis, or again, if it's standalone, then for example a peer review publication. So generally, so an example here around this particular caveat example is basically where you can have for example an investigator or researcher compose a research thesis based on conducting actual research, for example, doing interviews, conducting interviews, doing the analysis around those interviews, and then doing the write-up around that work. Then, in addition, the addition could be that they have composed sort of publications or manuscripts for peer review and peer review publication, for example. But those works, the works that have been composed as peer-reviewed publications, they may be standalone pieces of work, so they may not have a direct link with a research thesis. And on purpose, some investigators look to do that so that actually the contribution to a particular specialty comes from several perspectives rather than just one perspective that has, for example, sub follow-ups, for example. So to know the difference um, is important for those who are sort of novices or starting out as composing literature reviews. I would recommend that they find out more about sort of the differences through colleagues and those who have more experience, because in this context, generally a literature review can be quite easily a standalone piece of writing and publication, for example. But at the same time, whilst being standalone, it can also link to a research that other authors or investigators, for example, have contributed, and link and a bridge in a way to link with the specialty from another sort of direction or perspective. And the final point I want to make here is that it's helpful to determine the preferred style for citation and referencing. Now, around these points, citation is normally citation or references. That the reference style. There are two main sort of formats. There's the Vancouver format and there's the Harvard format. Now, with Vancouver, after identifying a literature and starting to compose work and have it and actually putting sort of context on paper to get work published, for example, Vancouver requires numbers at the end of particular sentences or paragraphs and works generally, so that the numbers correspond to a list at the end of a piece of writing or a literature review in this context. Now, Vancouver I mean, for example, when works are looking to get published, or authors, investigators are looking to get works published, their literature review published, the style would depend on what the author guidelines are, based on the journal that the authors have identified to get the work peer reviewed. So it's important to have an understanding of both. So Vancouver requires a number format, and Harvard requires the surname of the author, the first author of a particular piece of work that's being referenced, plus the year that author had that work published in. And there are differences also if, for example, some writings or research that's been published that has more than one author, then, for example, the author, the investigator, in brackets after a sentence, after the end of a sentence, has to have should have, for example, Jones et al. Dot 2022, for example, or 2021. So basically, uh, um, what tends to happen between works that are have the Vancouver method versus the Harvard method is the manuscript or piece of writing, the literature review can extend the word count when works are written up or composed in Harvard referencing versus Vancouver, because the words in within the manuscript can add up quite quickly. But having said that, Vancouver can be difficult as well, or can be challenging, because when, for example, a literature review has been composed completely, for example, then later, or for example, an investigator or investigatory team then happens to come upon a research that's more that is similar, but more recent. For example, so 2022 versus I don't know, for example, 2016 or 17, for example, or 18, then what the investigator has to do, or the investigatory team has to do, is basically then go back to the numbers that have been put as part of the referencing, and they can add that, or it might mean they take away the one reference that has been dated from 2016, 17, or 18, and then replace it with the one that's 2022. But then that means going back to the reference list at the end as well, and updating that. So it can be can be arduous, but again, it depends on the objective of where and also where the author or investigatory team want to get that work published, for example. So have in mind, as part of this caveat, is to understand the sort of main objective about the why, for example, questioning why the literature review should be done in the first place. Sometimes the answer is quite simple, but sometimes the answer can be, is it really necessary? So that's something only the investigator or the researcher or research team, for example, can actually get an understanding from the beginning. Okay, so I'm now going to highlight a few points which kind of delves into the question that I asked at the end of the last slide, which is relating to, for example, is a literature review really necessary? Is it what's needed, or as part of as part of a question, a part of a question to be answered in and around a particular research topic or a topic. So the question here in this slide, I've highlighted a few points. Why have a literature review, or why review literature? The first point is to provide background information on a topic, and in a way that's kind of elementary. The second point is to review the extent to which your questions have been answered, or even to review the extent to which your questions are being sort of evaluated or explored. So, for example, I mentioned as part of one of the previous slides that it's important to have a sort of a time frame relating to how far back you should go when conducting a literature review. Now, in search engines, in different search engines, there's filters that you can apply, which actually help investigators to get not just current research around a particular research question, but also more retrospective. But when going back retrospective, it becomes number one, it becomes arduous, and but number two is it becomes less relevant in some context. But also that's not to say current research around a particular topic once doing the doing applying keywords against a particular research question, for example, is not to say that current research is not relevant to that question either. So the generic understanding around this is not to have literature that's anything older than over a decade, over 10 years old. If, for example, someone is conducting a systematic review, or something that's referred to as systematic review, or a meta-analysis, then going back further may be important. But I won't get into talking about systematic review or meta-analysis in this workshop, but generally they are more intense, and basically from a literature review perspective, have in mind that you should have 10 years when looking for literature. And when you think about it, there's across different search engines against particular topics, there's not a shortage of contribution from different authors and investigators in that time frame. So have that as baseline, or a baseline understanding. So the next point I want to make is about identifying gaps, those questions that remain to be answered, and that's kind of one of the crux of conducting a literature review. So whoever, for example, has requested the literature review to be done, for example, they may ask for example, to get an overview, or they may ask to do something more intense relating to composing work. And so in that context, an investigator can kind of balance it out, and it's always important as investigators to actually kind of be intuitive, or use initiative, to the extent where, for example, if it's about identifying gaps in an area of healthcare, for example, then it's important to have in mind that it's kind of good practice, or good premise, I should say, to actually implement or do a literature review, and that way investigators, whether novice or even experienced ones, can actually understand what's been happening in and around the literature around a particular topic over a given sort of time point. And then another point I want to make is helps a literature review can help communicate to readers or the audience the context of research and the discourse to which it contributes. So kind of an obvious point, but sometimes writing generally can be quite arduous, but it helps communicate some of the most difficult topics or issues around particular areas of healthcare, for example. And so in doing this, um, it can contribute to bringing a sort of better understanding around a particular subject matter or subject entity. And then finally, on this point, on this slide, I want to make the point about a literature review also helps find evidence to support or counter an argument. So what this means, and again, in a previous slide I mentioned, it's important that so the two main things in a literature review is that it has to be evaluative and it has to be a sort of a critical appraisal. And so in being in having those two points as part of an investigator's mindset, that means that they should want to be argumentative to an extent from an academic debate perspective, let's say, so that whatever's been done in work whatever's been highlighted in literature around a given specialty or given topic, for example, around healthcare, then if something has not been, for example, has not been explored, but an investigator or investigatory team has highlighted that actually, retrospectively, whilst it's important that such and such has been implementing and has made absolute efforts. On the one hand, from a counter perspective, an investigator might say, well, that context has helped and is very important, but because there are more advances around different aspects of healthcare, some of what's been done retrospectively no longer is applicable. So in more novel work, for example, it may well be that the investigator says that that as part of their literature review, there may be, for example, apart from the evaluation and a critical appraisal, there may be a recommendation. And so the investigator can and should recommend that, for example, what they are postulating in their literature review should be sort of piloted, for example. So that's important as part of the literature review process. I'm now going to highlight a bit about how to determine the scope of a literature review. And I know in one of a couple of the previous slides, I've kind of alluded to some of this, but these are a couple of points here. How to determine the scope of a literature review would be to broaden your review to include similar or related topics or investigations or studies using similar methodologies or perspectives in line with what's already been contributed to the knowledge base around that topic, that subject entity. So it's important to understand whether, for example, one of the other things is an investigator or an investigatory team will know whether they're based on a research question or a subject matter, for example, that they're looking to add more perspective around. They will know from search engines, even doing basic search in the first place, for example, which can be useful. They will know whether there's too little around that topic from the beginning. So it's important to know that using sort of the review literature review methodologies that have already been published to kind of carry on in in and around uh, contributing to the work the research that is that the investigatory team are looking to sort of expand on. And then there's the point, as a couple of points around, is there too much around the topic as well, because that can equally be quite can equally be quite challenging. So it's important to be selective, perhaps exclude work or research that is more tenuously connected to your study or the investigation, or perhaps limit the study or research to work that has been published within the last 3 years. So I've mentioned, for example, the last 10 years as a decade as kind of a baseline over a kind of baseline duration. But if you find that there's going to be that the results around a particular literature, a basic literature search, which is kind of one of the first steps that someone would do, that investigators, novice investigators, and those who are sort of more expert at expert level, they would do a basic literature search just to find out how much has actually been published around that given topic. Now, saying that, all of those the results that come out of a literature search may not all be completely relevant, but knowing that there is too much, or there could be too much around a given topic based on the keywords or the terminologies that have been entered into entered into a search engine, can give can give can give investigators or investigatory teams an understanding that actually we should that rather than doing 10 years, going over 10 years, around 10 years, we should limit our the study or investigation or the literature search to 3 years, for example. Now, in that 3 year duration, you may get you might not get enough. So it's kind of balancing it out so that that investigators get enough understanding based on the topic or research question that they're inquiring about, but also knowing that if knowing that either way there will be limitations. So it's important again to be selective around and as part of the process. Um, I'm now going to mention a few points about actually this is something that that as part of this workshop is something that those listening in and those who are checking out this Re-Phew consulting workshop generally, consider this as something you can do in at your own time. So consider the following topic: an investigation into the factors that influence the take up of networking sites by older people. So let's say that's a research topic in some way or another. And there are two questions here. What are the key concepts and potential stands for the literature review? Sorry, the potential strands for the literature review for this topic. So that's point number one. And point number two is what are the key words that you might use in your literature search. Now, in related to the second point, just want to add, when anyone looks at for example, a peer review publication, a literature review that's been peer reviewed and published, for example, it's important to understand that in most peer review publications, well, in fact, in all peer review publications, there will be an abstract, and this is normally at the sort of header or the cover page of a published a paper publication. And what happens is that in the abstract, which would be probably between 250 or 300 words, that outlines the whole research in that many words, there will be a subsection, a small section as part of the abstract, which relate to keywords. Now, normally under keywords, there would be probably between three keywords and maybe six, maybe seven keywords that highlight an overview of the different terminologies or keywords that have used or relate to that whole research. So when considering a topic, it's important to have in investigators or investigatory teams should know that there should be a few keywords in mind that they would use to get at least a basic search underway. So in this point, I want to emphasize again, sort of what are the keywords that you might use in your literature research, and again, this is something that you can that those checking out this workshop can do in their own time. So key concepts and words. Okay. So as part of this, there are actually four keywords that stand out initially, and I would recommend those checking out this workshop to do this and see if they get the same sort of results that come out. So there's with that particular topic or subject entity, there's the keyword older people, there's a keyword social networking sites, there's a keyword technology adoption, and there's a keyword internet access. Now, under older people, you may have additional keywords that come out, or words that relate to that. And it's important to know this because generally speaking, some of those words will not be relevant to what that question might be about. For example, and if someone was going to do this work as a literature review, then, for example, they may not have the same words that result as part of the key concepts or the main key words. So with older people, for example, you have also older users, elderly, seniors, and even something referred to as silver surfers. And so, and in under social networking sites, you have social networking sites. Obviously, you have social networks. You have something referred to as SNS, and you have Facebook. And then technology adoption, you have technology adoption, take up, acceptance, and technophobia. And then under internet access, you have internet world wide web, access, accessibility, and digital divide. So these are just some of the concepts linked, keywords linked with some other terminologies that come out as part of the sort of filtration process. But I would encourage this to be done at your own time, in your own times. So I'm gonna now so I'm gonna another activity that I would encourage as part of this workshop that you can do in your own time is part of a sort of a brainstorm activity. And the point is, what might we number one point, bullet point here is what might we mean by a critical literature review, and in some contexts I've highlighted some of that in this part of a previous slide, but it's always good to go back and understand what we really mean by critical critical literature review. And then the second bullet point here: what questions might you ask yourself as you start reading a text as part of your literature review? So, for example, you'll get as part of a basic literature search, there'd be several hundred, for example, peer review publications based on a given topic, for example, and what then happens is that based on the sort of let's say for example, you pick something like 10 peer review publications out of an initial literature search, for example, and based on the sort of keywords or terminologies that you've put into different search engines, let's say. Then from there, it's important to ask yourself how relevant when looking through those 10 peer review publications, for example, how relevant they are to the actual question that you have, or you want to look to answer or contribute understanding to. So so again, questions. What questions might you ask yourself as you start reading a text as part of your literature review? So this is very important, because you might find, for example, out of those 10 publications, that in relating to what the intent is around a particular research question or a topic entity, that out of those 10 publications, there may not be any relevance there. So it's important to have that in your own times, in your own way, to kind of understand process, but also understand that it's always good to have a sort of a brainstorm around before sort of conducting a sort of a literature review. I'm now going to highlight some points about a critical approach. So a critical approach may involve asking questions as you approach a text, in order to think your way into the mind of the author. And this is part of, as I mentioned, literature reviews again generally are have to be should be a critically process, a piece of writing that involves a critical appraisal approach, but also should be evaluative. So in this context, when investigators or investigatory teams look into peer review publications or works that have been published, when they look at the when looking at the work, investigators have to put their mind in the mind of authors or co-authors who composed that work, because in a way that actually then helps bridge an understanding of whether that the investigatory team want to, for example, take the same trajectory in answering a particular research question or a topic, or they want to go in a different if they want to go in a different direction, but still obviously ensuring that the work is still sort of validated, and sort of contextualizes with the current body of knowledge around that given topic. So here's a couple of points I'm going to make around this critical approach. So why am I reading this? What are the authors trying to do in writing this? What are the authors saying that is relevant to what I want to find out? How convincing is what the authors are saying? And then the final point here is, in conclusion, what use can I make of this? So all of these bullet points are part of the sort of critical appraisal approach in some contexts, but generally speaking, these points are important in any piece of writing, but in a literature review, they actually become more about actually contextualizing against sort of for and against sort of current body of knowledge around a particular field or specialty. I'm now going to highlight a few points about the points that lead to analysis. So it kind of touches on the previous slide, but there's a few sort of additional points, and I'm going to go through this quite quickly. So there's two sort of perspectives here, or two columns with different numbers of sort of bullet points. So the first one is again, why am I sort of reading this? What are the authors trying to do in writing this? What are the authors saying that is relevant to what I want to find out? How convincing is what the authors are saying? What use can I make of this? Then there's also points like, what review question am I asking of this text? What type of literature is this? What sort of intellectual project is being undertaken? What is being claimed? To what extent is there backing for claims? How adequate is any theoretical orientation to back claims? To what extent does any value stance adopted affect claims? To what extent are claims supported or challenged by others' work? To what extent are claims consistent with my experience? And what is my summary evaluation of the text in relation to my review question or issue? So these are sort of points in relating to analyses, and I'm not going to. There's a slide here that I'm not going to sort of delve into, but it talk this slide is just outlining. It just has a few points in outlining the structuring of a literature review. But towards the end of this workshop, there are a few resources that I think would be more constructive to highlight those than highlighting what's in this particular slide. But generally speaking, there's an introduction, an introduction, there's a main part, there's a discussion, and a conclusion. But I will highlight a few resources about how to go about structuring a literature review as well. Yes, and there is a slide here about organizing the main part of the review, and I'm going to skip this slide. A checklist. The next slide is a checklist for evaluating your review. So the main points here is that, is it fit for purpose? As one of the main bullet points. Does the evaluation have a clear structure with appropriate signposts and links? And the final bullet point here is it critical in approach? So again, evaluation, critical approach, they're kind of almost synonymous, but investigators or investigatory teams or research teams, whether beginners or kind of experts, either way, will look to a good literature review should ensure that investigators are looking at work from a critical perspective and evaluating perspective. And the evaluation perspective should be such that the investigators don't look to completely for example, say that works that have been done retrospectively are no good, but it is about pointing out that areas and focuses, for example, through evaluation have highlighted such and such and such and such. It's about constructing sort of an approach in relating to contextualizing, but also allowing process to ensure that that works currently and retrospectively, that there's good sort of measure between both. So this is something I want to, as part of this workshop, an activity that you can sort of try for yourself. So consider ways in which you might organize your ideas in the main part of your literature review. Now, as part of this example, or this try for yourself slide, I've thrown in an example of a literature review that was published in a peer-review publication in 2012 by an author, Mohammed and team, about how young people cope with chronic kidney disease. And it's a literature review that was published in the Journal of Renal Care. And so in looking to sort of organize ideas, I thought it'd be good to provide this example because it's quite a pertinent topic in some regards, and relating to what's referred to the specialty around pediatric nephrology. And basically, this literature review kind of should highlight or provide should provide researchers who are starting out, experts, or different stages really, about how thoughts around a particular research question were composed to form this literature review. So the main research question, or the question that needed to be asked, or was asked really, was how was to assess really, or evaluate, and also critically appraise really how young people cope with this particular long-term condition referred to as chronic kidney disease. So try it for yourself. Have a look at this. Look at the example. This is a full reference in this particular on this particular slide. And that's it really. This is the reference list that I thought I share with you as part of this workshop. This is the last slide, and basically here I've highlighted a couple of sort of book publications, and the full citation for the literature review titled "How Young People Cope with Chronic Kidney Disease," that was published in 2012. The full reference is in this particular slide, but a couple of the book publications to help investigators start their way, is a book by Berdania and colleagues, and their colleagues, which was published as a book publication in 2020, and the book is titled "So you have to write a literature review," and it's actually a guided workbook for engineers, but is applicable really to anyone who's looking to compose a literature review. Generally, there'll be some points in there. There's also a book by Snyder from 2019, and it's a book titled "Literature Review as a Research Methodology, an Overview and Guidelines," and it was actually it's not a book publication. It's actually a paper publication. It was published in the Journal of Business Research. you can check that out. There is a book by Wallace Wallace and Ray, dating back to 2007, titled Critical Reading and Writing for Postgraduates. Um, and there's works by um, Baxter Baxter and team from 2006. It's a little bit dated, but still the context that's in the books in the book publication is still relevant and important. So the book is titled How to Research, and it's an Open University Press book publication. So that's it. Thank you for listening in on this Re-Phew consulting workshop. I hope it's been helpful. Apologies, it's been a little bit long-winded. Talking about literature reviews can sometimes be like that. And I want to say thank you for listening again. And do feel free to follow up any of these things by contacting Re-Phew Consulting, I'll be I'll look forward to hearing from you. Thank you very much.